well, first of all, the real life women of Jane were arrested at the end or somewhere in the middle of 1972.
Mhm.
And the way I kind of present that in my novel is essentially the way it went. They were arrested, they got out on bail, and their lawyers like knew that Roe was rolling up to the Supreme Court. So they were kind of like they slow rolled Jane. And so as soon as that trial, right? So as soon as Roe became the law of the land, that was it.
Hey, you guys, welcome to the Literary Lounge, where we have honest conversations with authors in life, literature, and the spaces in between. On this special occasion of Women's Day, I'm thrilled to welcome Kerri Maher on the panel, who's joining us all the way from Massachusetts. Since her debut novel, The Kennedy Debutante, in 2018, Kerri has spent several historical novels, including The Girl in White Cloths and The Paris Bookseller, which celebrated 4 weeks on the indie bestseller list. Her works explore significant historical figures with rich detail and compelling narratives. And in addition to all of this, Kerri is also the founder of Yarn, an award winning journal for YA literature. That is amazing, Kerri. And she's also the author of a memoir called This Is Not a Writing Manual. I would love to hear more on that. But today we are here to discuss her latest novel, All You Have to Do Is Call, which tells the uplifting story of the Jane Collective, a group of brave women who secretly fought for the right to choose, and a tale of courage that resonates deeply in today's era. First of all, thank you so much, Kerri, for joining me for this discussion. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on the panel with me here today. How are you? How have you been?
I'm good, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you. So thank you for asking me. This is a real, this is very exciting. And I'm good. I'm here in Massachusetts where there's snow on the ground. So it's probably warmer where you are. Um,
It's
uh,
not
so
snowing in the north, at least not where I am, but it's relatively cold.
okay, all right. Well, so hopefully in the next few months or 2 months, maybe it'll clear up and we'll have some warmer weather on the way.
Wow. I would love to have snow where I am, but unfortunately, it does not snow that much. It does in the northern, very northern part of the country, in the Himalayas, somewhere near that, but not where I am. I'm relatively closer to the central part of India.
Got it.
So, I know that we're recording this way in advance. We have Women's Day in March. We're here in January. But I'd love to know if you have some exciting plans for Women's Day. What do you usually do? What plans do you have for Women's Day this year?
You know, I find that my life is a woman's day. I am a single mother to a really amazing 14-year-old daughter. And so, I spend a lot of my time when I'm not writing, raising her into being as much of a kick-ass girl as I possibly can be. And, like part of the reason I'm a writer is so that I can have hours that are a little bit more forgiving so that I can take her to, she's recently become a competitive figure skater. So like that is her thing right now. So there's a lot of driving to rinks. And I don't think of this as like domestic like work. Like it's like I'm doing like the thing like that we're, that parents do. So I don't have like big fancy plans for Women's Day. I'm going to, fight the good fight on the as local level as I possibly can. I will also be working on my next novel, which is also about more amazing women in history. So there's that too.
Wow, I would love to see what comes out next from you because I absolutely devoured All You Have to Do Is Call. Frankly speaking, I asked a lot of my friends to read it as well, and two of them had finished reading it, and they finished reading it in like 3 days. And they were super thrilled that I could introduce them to a novel like this, where nobody actually is. Because since this novel is not very well available in India at this point in time, so they were really thrilled that I could introduce them to a topic like this and make them more aware of the Jane Collective. But before we dive into all of that, I would also love to know what you've been reading these days, and do you even get a chance to read?
I do two kinds of reading. When I read with my eyeballs, I am reading usually for work. So I'm either blurbing a book that's going to be coming out, which is really exciting. I love doing that. And or for pleasure, I listen to audiobooks. I'm a subscriber to, I don't know if you all have Libro FM, but it's like Audible that you get through Amazon. It's like any audiobook subscription service. And I listen to amazing books that way. One book I think sort of on point for this interview that I have loved in the last year is by an Australian author named Natasha Lester, who's very popular in the States too, called The Disappearance of Astrid Bricard. And it's a three timeline novel, but like the real meat of the stories is the 1970s New York fashion scene. It is extremely feminist, in all the best possible ways. There are like really gripping storylines in all three timelines. That's been really one of my absolute favorite books of the last year or so that I really want to throw out there to all your captive audience.
I would love to pick that book up. It sounds the title itself is so exciting. I think this is going to be my read for Women's Day this year.
I think that I really think you'll enjoy it.
I loved All You Have to Do Is Fall. So I mean, even if it's remotely similar to that, I think I would absolutely love reading it.
It has a lot of the same themes, I would say.
Oh, awesome! Can't wait. So
Yes.
I think I've read, but when I was reading All You Have to Do Is Call, I was so immersed in it, I literally have to put aside my work and just focus on the book entirely. After finishing the book, I did so much research on the Jane Collective. I dived into all their stories. I tried reading about them as much as possible. I also created like full-fledged videos, reels on the book, talking about the Jane Collective, and this was so, so impressive. So before like we dive into the book, which is a fictional version of what happened back then, I would love to know your inspiration for the book and where it came from.
Yeah, so this is sort of a fun story. I tell a little bit of it in my author's note at the end of the book, but I'll give you the more fleshed out version. So way back in the before times of 2018, I'm like driving to meet a friend of mine for a movie, and I'm listening to National Public Radio, NPR, which we have here, and they do these wonderful sort of longer narrative news stories about like human interest pieces, right? And I'm just listening and they're talking about the Jane Collective, which I had never heard of before. And they're telling the history of these group of women who started out as college students at the University of Chicago. They were activists. They were mostly civil rights activists. But they were also getting involved in more and more feminist causes. And they had these groups that they called consciousness raising groups. And consciousness raising groups were a feminist kind of women's lib thing everywhere. But they were very active for this group of women. And one day somebody needed an abortion. And one of the other women, who's the real life woman, is named Heather Booth, had access to a name and a provider who was known to be safe, and reasonably priced. And so basically they sent the woman there and it was a good experience. And then somebody else called and somebody else called and somebody else called. And it became the Jane Collective, like a collective of women who got more and more involved with this, what they called the service. The service being, abortion and the abortion. And it grew organically from a referral service to safe and affordable providers in and around Chicago to eventually taking over the actual D&C process themselves to become an entirely women operated essentially like a proto-Planned Parenthood. Jane provided not just abortion care, but some STD testing, some pregnancy testing, birth control counseling, all the things that we think of a women's health clinic offering, they offered, but they were illegal. And so here I am driving to meet my friend for this movie going, they did what? You like really? I mean, because not only were they very young, they were women just like me, like with no medical anything. They were not nurses. They like, but they learned how to do this one procedure, which they did with remarkable safety. Like they weren't able to keep records because of the illegal nature of what they were doing, but the estimates are that they referred and provided 11,000 abortions in the late 60s and early 70s. And this is just in one geographical area. It's pretty remarkable, this story. So I did what any good writer would do. As soon as I stopped the car, I fired up Amazon to see if anyone else had written about them, and they hadn't. And so I knew right away that I had to write a novel about them. So that is the story. That's the longer version of the story.
Wow, 2018 to 2023 and 2024. You've come a long way. So you had this idea all through this time. So did you like start working on it at that point in time itself, or did you like wait for a couple of years, do your research, and then, this happened?
No, so at that time, my very first historical novel, The Kennedy Debutante, was going to come out in the fall. That came out in October of 2018. And at the time, I was also working on writing my second historical novel called The Girl in White Gloves, which is about Grace Kelly. And so I was busy writing and promoting other books. And then when I turned in my second novel, The Girl in White Gloves, it was time to kind of pitch new ideas to my publisher. And my agent went to them with two ideas. She said, basically, Kerri wants to write two books. One is called The Paris Bookseller, which is about the original Shakespeare and Company bookstore in Paris in the 1920s. All the famous writers went there. And the other one was a book we were just calling the Jane novel, which was going to be like a novel loosely based on the women of the Jane Collective. And my publisher was like, yes, to The Paris Bookseller. That was an easy yes. They were like, it has the two magic words in the title, Paris and book. Like everyone's going to love that book. And they were like, the Jane novel, I don't know, like Kerri's written about the Kennedys and Grace Kelly in a bookstore. Are we really going to have her write about abortion? Like they were like, probably not. But but they signed me for two books anyway. So I go off and I write The Paris Bookseller. So I started writing The Paris Bookseller like in the winter of early part of 2019. And I very happily worked on that book. And then it came time to revisit like the subject of the next book. And by now it is the fall of 2020. Remember the fall of 2020? We're sort of back in lockdown after the summer. You know, Trump presidency, all the things, right? Like the world has changed even just in the course of 18 months. And so we repitched the Jane novel as a feminist protest novel. And I got the green light. And so I had been kind of poking at it during all of those times, but like really I was devoted to writing these other books first. But it was then in the fall of 2020 that I was able to really devote myself to earnestly researching and writing what became All You Have to Do Is Call. And this may be one of your next questions, but I'll preemptively just say that the Dobbs decision, the famous decision that revoked abortion rights in this country, famously we have Roe versus Wade, which in 1973 gave women the right to abortion care nationwide. Then this Dobbs decision came down in the summer of 2022, which essentially moved abortion rights to the states. So now we have states where it's legal and some states where it's illegal. And it's further there's more danger on the way, right? Like we're now in an administration that wants to just get rid of it completely, no matter what they've said. That is their plan. Uh, so Dobbs happened in 2022. I was mostly done with the book at that point. Um, but what was the only good thing to come out of Dobbs for this book is that I think no one quite knew how to like position all you have to do is call like, but Dobbs brought out the righteous feminist in everybody, including my publisher, and they were like, "Oh, bring it on. Like we are publishing this book. We are saying all the words. We're going to have all the hard conversations." So, um the book really had a journey from no to bring it,
Yeah,
which was really exciting for me as a writer.
that was wonderful. And so by the time it came out, and by the time that the Supreme Court decision happened, I mean, it's surprising how the book was so well positioned. You had the entire story in it from historical point of view, and at this point in time, something exactly the same is happening. I mean, kudos to you for bringing it up, for talking about such an important issue. I think everybody needs to read it if they really want to understand the political atmosphere of the US or probably the world, in the entire world. So, yeah, I mean, that was really important. And, but since you were working on this at a time where lockdowns were happening all over the place, were you able to interact with somebody from the original Jane Collective team?
So I did try. There are two nonfiction accounts of, well, first of all, if you Google the Jane Collective, there's all kinds of great archival material that is firsthand accounts of women who went to Jane or who were in Jane. So I did a lot of that reading. I read there's a book by Laura Kaplan called The Legendary. I can't quite remember the title. It's a long title. The writer's name is Laura Kaplan. I read that book. There's another book that's kind of like a nonfiction fiction hybrid called Hello. This is Jane by Judith Arcana. Both of them were in Jane. I tried actually to talk to Laura Kaplan, but she couldn't consult on another creative project because her book, I'm pretty sure, had been optioned for a film. But I did wind up talking to one woman who was kind of on the one of the outer rings, we would say. She wasn't in the room where it was happening, but she was involved with Jane, and so I did get to talk to her, and that was really good to be able to talk to her. But a connection that I think is not so obvious that again I mentioned in my author's note, but I always like to flag it also in interviews is that we were all in lockdown, the pandemic was unfolding, and the great heroes of the pandemic were the frontline workers, which included doctors and nurses, right? Like they were like really the ones, like, they were putting their lives on the line every day to care for people who needed care. And even though that was not like a feminist act, it had nothing to do with gender or anything, they were really inspiring to me because they were doing kind of what the women of Jane were willing to do. It's kind of like a really highly developed call to service and a willingness to put yourself and your life and your livelihood on the line for other people. And I did that, that idea really worked its way into the book, and in a way that I'm not sure it would have if the pandemic hadn't been happening as I was writing.
Wow, that's very interesting. Which also, now that you've talked about doctors, I'm thinking it would have taken a lot of effort to research about the technical procedures mentioned in the book, and to explain what exactly happened in abortions and how women actually conducted these abortions without having professional training. So where did that information come from?
I have a very good friend who's a midwife, um, who's had all the training. So I talked to her a lot, and she fact checked the book twice. So that's how I did it. I wasn't going to be able to do one myself. Um, so so I had to use a lot of imagination and firsthand sort of interview experience.
Wow. could you also get a chance to speak to somebody who had gotten a procedure done from the Jane Collective back then?
I wasn't able to talk to anybody who had gotten the procedure done. But again, there are so many firsthand accounts. And I think one of the things that was really striking to me when I was doing this research and reading about these women who had gone to Jane for an abortion was how many women of those women went back to Jane to volunteer. So it was like they went for this procedure, the service, feeling however they felt about it, and Jane made the experience comfortable for them. And, you know, this term women's liberation, which has really gone out of fashion appropriately, I think. But it was an important term in the 70s. I mean, it was what they called feminism in the 70s. It was women's lib, right? And Jane took really seriously its charge that this was part of the women's liberation project, right? That this was not an act of termination, it was an act of liberation. And so with all respect for the fact that it was a very difficult decision to come to, nobody makes this decision lightly. But they were able to like hold those two things at the same time in a way that I think even extremely liberal people, at least in America, in my generation growing up, have had a hard time doing. Now, I think with especially post Dobbs, with the more recent wave of reproductive justice protests and movements, now we are holding those two things together. Like this is a very difficult decision. No one comes to it lightly. And it is not the end of the world. It is not the end of your life. It is not the worst day of your life. It is a day in your life. Anyway, so that was really illuminating to me in the research.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And which was my next question in terms of all the stories that you read about, in terms of all the research that you did. Was there any story that stood out to you? Something that, you're like, okay, wow, this was a wow moment for me. You read it and you were like, this changes things.
Um, so there wasn't, I think, one. There were a few, I would say. So just to continue what I was talking about before, and then I'll make another point. Um, I really was wowed by the language with which the women of Jane talked about abortion care then and even now, right? Like it was just, and also honestly, the way people at large talked about it just differently. Um, and I sort of thought to myself, well, God, what's changed between 1972 and now, 2019, 22? And I was like, the pro-life movement. The pro-life movement hijacked all the language we use to talk about abortion. Um, and now we say anti-abortion. We don't say pro-life. But for I was born in 1975. I'm going to be 50 this summer. Um, you know, in my growing up, it was pro-life versus pro-choice. And even no matter how pro-choice you were, you still referred to the other side as pro-life. And we also spoke about abortion in these kind of hushed tones as if it was something to be ashamed of. And it kind of rocked my world that like it wasn't always like that. It wasn't even like that recently. In the early 70s. Um, Along those same lines, two other wow pieces of information um, from my research that are really like not talked about very often, which is in 1971, there was the Comprehensive Child Care Development Act, which had it become law, would have provided child after school care and preschool to American families. Okay. Um, Imagine how that would help women who want to work. Okay. It passed the House and the Senate. Okay. It was almost law. Richard Nixon vetoed it. Right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. The other near miss in this period was the Equal Rights Amendment, which I won't get into the recent, there's been a whole recent hullabaloo about it, in the United States, but the history is the Equal Rights Amendment was drafted in 1923. Um, and but it came up for ratification as an amendment to the United States Constitution in 1970. I have to refresh my memory. I'm pretty sure it was 1971. Um, so again, it passed the House and the Senate, okay? And then it went to the states for ratification. It was almost ratified at that time. And something I learned only recently is that that amendment was given a time limit for ratification. Like if it wasn't ratified by the right number of states, I think it was 38 states, in a certain period of time, they weren't, it was going to expire. It had an expiration date. It is the only amendment that has ever been given an expiration date. The only one.
I have
So,
goosebumps.
right? Okay, so like we had like the women's movement had real wins in the 70s. I don't want to like we got Title IX, we got Roe. I mean, but like an amendment to the Constitution is something that cannot be dismantled. The if the Child Care Development Act had been in effect for 50 years, I don't think anyone would have taken it apart, right? Like it would have just become like Social Security, like we just something that as Americans we expect. So
Did it ever become an act?
no, no, oh, no. And today, Democrats wouldn't dream of proposing such a thing. We are so much more conservative as a country now than we were in the 70s. It's shocking. Um, that was probably the biggest, there's the hijacking of the language, but also like the fact that these laws were almost possible in the 70s was really, that was a wow, because no one would put forth the Child Care Development Act now. Nobody. Even Bernie Sanders wouldn't put forth the Child Care Development Act, probably. He might. But anyway, so that those were really big wows.
Now, I don't know what to say honestly at this point in time because I'm just thinking about this and it feels like a dark period we're living in. We were in a much better position in the 1970s, and today we can't even dream of something like that.
Well, except that I think that the good news is now, especially because of the internet, here we are talking to each other continents away. I think there's a different kind of activism, and it is absolutely happening. It is, I mean, I got more involved in this last election than I've ever been involved in anything. Like I did a phone bank, like I did as much as I possibly could with my little tiny platform. Um, so I do think that there's kind of an awakening to activism that has been much overdue and much needed. And I think the ball is rolling, right? Like the ball had to get rolling in the 70s, like women got the right to vote in 1919. That took generations. Okay. So then we got what we got in the 70s. And now the bar is higher, right? We're not just talking about women, right? We're talking about trans rights. We're talking about we're centering the conversations of Black women, and other, people of color, and all of that is so important and was not happening in the 70s. So I think there's a lot of reasons for hope now. Um, those are the things that I look at when I need to feel better about the world.
I think one more thing that has happened over the last decade or so is that we've connected better, as you previously mentioned, that the internet has connected us better. We're talking continents away at this point in time, and also it has also spread a lot of awareness. People in India have, for a very long period of time, looked at women in the US and thought that that is what freedom looks like. That is what I want to be, and that is Um, Probably I'll work and I'll probably also have a child and probably I'll do both of these things together. I'll probably step out of my house. I won't only be a housewife or a homemaker at that point in time. So I think, and overall, this feminist movement is not only US central at this point in time. Women all over the world are talking about it. When the Supreme Court decision in 2022 came out, women in India were furious. Women in Australia might have been furious. What's happening? Why is this happening again? And something that got abolished back then, and now we're thinking about it as a taboo again. Why? I mean,
Right.
this was an uproar not only in one particular country but all over the world, which I think is huge.
I agree. I agree. And, you know, I actually looked this up because, in the United States, people are very fond of saying, well, in Europe, like this is like not even a conversation, but it is. I mean, and actually, abortion rights are getting eroded everywhere. There are very few countries that, like France, ensconced it in their constitution. Go France. Like that was really like a joyous moment, I think, for feminist movements and reproductive justice movements everywhere. It was to see France really do the right thing. So exactly, this is an international conversation. The sort of the forces of conservatism and darkness are taking hold in lots of places. And so I think that, you know, to sort of echo what you're saying, when Dobbs happened here, there was this hue and cry everywhere because it's happening everywhere.
Right.
So,
Yeah. People start thinking about their own rules and regulations and what should change and why is this happening in the US, especially now that we're in the 21st century. We're thinking about things like gender fluidity, we're thinking about rights, like you mentioned, and in all of that, we're thinking about abortion being made illegal. That does not even sound like something that should be brought up.
I know. So I went to one of the like a women's march reproductive justice rally. I think it was like in the fall of 2021. So it was before Dobbs. But and I'm in Massachusetts, where abortion care is safe in Massachusetts. So this is a relatively low stakes rally. But my favorite sign that someone was carrying, there's all kinds of great signs, right, Greg? But my favorite one was just a green like poster board in black Sharpie. I can't believe we're still fighting for this shit.
Well, I mean, that is true,
Right?
right? Even
Right?
even I can't believe, like, why are we even talking about something like this? And governments are bothered. Governments care that abortion should be made illegal. Why? I mean, you should be thinking about something else. Go stop the war. Stop thinking about women rights.
Exactly.
Okay. Coming back to all you have to do is
Okay.
call a little bit.
Yes.
I would love to know who your favorite character is from the book.
Oh, I get this question a lot. Um, I can't choose. Like I love them all. They all have a piece of me in them. Margaret is the young English professor. I was not an English professor, like a tenure track PhD, but I taught writing at the university level for many years, so I know what it's like to be her on some level. Um, you know, I know I know what it's like to be Patty. I mean, like uh, many, many, many moons ago, when I was much, much, much younger, I had more, we'll call them pro-life, tendencies. I was raised Catholic. Um, uh, anyway, so and the journey that Patty goes on I think really was an interesting one to me. The person I'm probably least like is Veronica. But I love Veronica. Veronica is who I want to be when I grow up.
I
Um, like, and going back to the inspiration for writing the book, like listening to that story about these women, I knew inside myself that I would not be able to be one of them. Like certainly, maybe I could have been a driver or somebody who did the laundry for Jane, but there's no way I would have been brave enough to be in the room where it was happening. But I couldn't write about it. And, bringing these stories to life and bringing them into the public consciousness is not nothing, right? Um, so I just have enormous affection for all three of them. I was actually telling somebody, I think it was my therapist actually, but I've spoken about this at length in other places, that the Patty Veronica friendship, early in the book, they both reflect kind of separately that if they were to become friends now as adult women, or if they were to meet as adult women, they would probably not become friends. But it's because they became friends when they were young in middle school, and they have all this shared history that they have continued to be friends. And I have one friend from high school that's like that. I just love her. She's much more like Veronica. I'm much more like Patty. But like, we are still friends, because we have all of this shared history. And I really wanted in this book to explore female friendship in many forms. So we have the older friendships, we have the newer friendships, and some shifting friendships, and then they have children. That was actually something that was important to me. Uh, I think I've made this clear over the course of the conversation, but I'll just say it. Unlike my first three novels that were about real people, all of the characters and All You Have to Do Is Call are fictional. Like they're all fictional. They're not, even though Jane was a real group of people, my Jane is a fictional version of Jane. And it's especially fictional in that my characters are older than the women of Jane tended to be. My characters are hovering around 30. And I did that on purpose because I really wanted my characters, some of them at least, to have children already. And Veronica, I knew was going to be pregnant also. I just knew that from the get-go when I thought about these characters, because I really wanted to explore all of those tensions in the book.
I think that was such a power move. When I read that Veronica is pregnant, I was like, wow. I think that changes things in so many ways because you're reading about abortion. That woman is giving abortions to so many people, helping her with abortions, helping women around uh, her place with abortions. And she herself is pregnant, and people are coming up to her and asking, "You are pregnant. So, what are your thoughts on it? Do you believe in abortion so much?" And and there is also a point where she is confused about it, or if not exactly confused, she is thinking about it. That I am pregnant and I am, offering abortions to women. Um, what does that represent? Do I not want my baby? Or if I really want my kid, then why do I have all of these thoughts? Sometimes when she's really tired and she, wants to carry on doing what she's doing and she's unable to do that, she starts questioning her pregnancy, which is such a real thought. I mean, I've heard so many women, my friends, my seniors, all of them just talk about something like this, and it's surprising how real this book is. I think Veronica's journey was also very, very real because she was going through it and she was doing something very opposite to what was happening to her own body. And I absolutely loved Patty's character because I think she has a journey.
Yes,
Veronica does not so much. She was very
right.
clear about what she
Yeah,
wanted from page
yeah.
one. But Patty has a journey. She changes, she transforms into somebody else by the end of it. So I think I loved how Patty grew over time and with time by the end of the book, what she turned into. I mean, that was brilliant.
Thank you. I enjoyed Patty too. Um, yeah, this book went through many, many, many drafts, and Patty's arc probably more than any of them. And in fact, Patty's younger sister, Eliza, that's all I'll say about her. She was a late addition to the book. The early drafts of the book did not have Eliza. Um, and she's an important secondary character. Um,
Absolutely. I think Patty's
yeah,
transformation happens largely because of her sister. And
right.
Yeah. So
It was harder to write her arc without Eliza.
right. Yeah. I mean, it justifies everything so beautifully at the end of it. Why she has a change of heart moment and all of that.
Yeah.
Which also brings me to talk about Veronica's husband. He was super supportive of what she was doing, and we've seen how ever since the beginning he was helping her with with Jane. He was helping her with the kid and her pregnancy. He was trying to be as supportive as possible, even though Veronica did not feel that way in at points, and she was like, "He'll probably never understand what it feels like to be pregnant and doing this. You'll probably never understand what it's like being a woman." So, in the real world, did you hear about any such men who were also supportive when this chain collective happened back in the 1960s and 70s?
Yes, there have been men who support women's rights down to the absolute nitty-gritty, like in at every stage. Like honestly, if there weren't, no laws ever would have been passed. Right? So, but that marriage, so there's two what we would say good marriages in the book. There's Patty and Matt and Veronica and Doug, right? So, and I wanted those marriages to feel satisfying to 21st century readers without being too anachronistic. Um, so, Doug is supportive up to a point, right? So because his wife is pregnant, he expresses more worry and fear about her. I mean, listen, Veronica is essentially the CEO of a business, right? Like she is running a pretty big like operation. So not only, and it's illegal, all right. So it's taking a toll on her in multiple ways. And I think even now, the most supportive spouse might say, and we might even reverse genders, might say to their partner, I'm a little worried about you, like spreading yourself too thin. But he had the added, fear of like losing the house. Like if she were to go to jail, they could lose everything, right? But ultimately he backs off. Um, but they have some uncomfortable moments in the course of the book. So
Mhm.
yeah, so I these marriages were essentially like my parents' marriage, and like the other adult marriages that I saw happening around me, many of which have survived, and the husbands have been supportive of their wives' careers and all of that stuff. So we might think of it as rare, but I'm not sure it's as rare as we might imagine. And I also like fiction can be aspirational. It's like, hey, be a Doug, be a Matt.
That is true. Yeah. And I think that is also a beautiful aspect of All You Have to Do Is Call, because we just don't talk about men like I'm forgetting the name of the person Margaret was dating, but we only don't have men like him, but we also have men
Gabe.
like that. Sorry?
Yeah. So Gabe, we all know a Gabe,
Gabe,
or
yes, yes,
or,
yes, yes,
or
yes.
more than one Gabe. Yeah.
So
So
there's
so
such a
right.
contrast. There's a huge contrast between their characters, which is amazing to see that you have men like Gabe, but men like Doug and Matt exist as well, which is again one of the beautiful parts of All You Have to Do Is Call. One
Thank you.
other thing that I noticed, that by the end of the book, we somehow see all of these women coming together, uniting for one common cause. After, Veronica and Patty and all of these people are convicted, not exactly convicted, but they are in jail for some time, and they come back. We see that all of these women who were previously not exactly supportive of the cause, they also start speaking up about it. Was that on purpose? And was that a message from you to your women audience out there that this is what it should be like? We should all unite for a common cause, and we should all speak up about something, even if we, might have apprehensions about it.
I don't think I thought of it as like a message to readers, but I, I that is the way I want the world to be. And I think that, well, first of all, the real life women of Jane were arrested at the end, or somewhere in the middle of 1972.
Mhm.
And the way I kind of present that in my novel is essentially the way it went. They were arrested, they got out on bail, and their lawyers like knew that Roe was rolling up to the Supreme Court. So they were kind of like they slow rolled Jane. And so as soon as that trial, right? So as soon as Roe became the law of the land, that was it. Like, you know, Jane was they women were regarded as heroes at that point. Um, so so that really happened. And so that was and there was a lot of support for them at the time. And of course, I absolutely want women to feel like we should be supporting other women, or or anybody of any gender that needs supporting. And even though Kamala Harris lost, um, I did feel that from the little bit of sort of activism that I took on in this last election. There were many, many, many groups of women that came together to try and get this fabulous woman elected to the highest office in the country. So it's happening. It's absolutely happening. Um, but like I said, it's yeah, we took a few steps back, but I believe we're going to get there. The arc of history absolutely bends toward justice. It does. It just does. Sometimes we're in a dark period, though.
Which also brings me to question you about the other side of the Jane Collector. So, of course, when you're talking about the book, when you're researching about the book, you must have read or probably heard perspectives of women who were not exactly supportive of abortions. Were you in touch with some of them? Did you, speak to any of them and hear about their perspective? What exactly goes on in their minds, and where are they coming from?
Well, I mean, I grew up with that point of view. So I didn't feel that I had to go out and do like a lot of like firsthand research about that point of view. Um, I don't know, like, Patty, we've already talked about Patty as the character. So I sort of gave Patty a lot of that, um, a lot of those thoughts about why, she's the mother of three children, she's a devoted wife and mother. This is what she's devoted her life to. She thinks it's the most important thing. And that's great, right? Um, but I also think, and I think that the Cheney family is very instructive in this regard. So, Dick Cheney was pretty conservative on, LGBTQIA rights until it turns out he has a daughter who is queer, right? Like, and that changed the family, like it in a lot of ways, right? And there really is, and you hear this all the time. Uh, what about abortion rights, about all kinds of different rights, right? About margin and marginalized people, right? Who it's not until it happens in their family to someone they love, right? Or someone they love brings this thing to their attention in a different way that they have a change of heart. And here, and hence Patty, right? I think, and it doesn't always happen, right? Like sometimes you have somebody in the family who has an abortion or marries outside the religion or whatever, and though that person is excommunicated from the family, and that's really unfortunate. That does happen, you know. Um, I wanted my book to feel uplifting though. So that was not an avenue I decided to explore in this book. With three points of view, I was juggling a lot of points of view. So I had to make some choices about like what aspects of this debate that I wanted to cover. Something we haven't talked very much about that was an important thing that I had to figure out how to talk about because I couldn't not talk about it is the fact that the real life women of Jane were by and large white. Um, but the women they
Hmm.
were giving the abortions to were by and large Black, especially after 1971, when New York State became the first state to legalize abortion, and women of means, who tended to be white women, could go take themselves to New York State and get like a nice hospital abortion, right? So that was a complicated dynamic that, especially because I was going to set it in Chicago, where the women of Jane really lived and worked. I couldn't just like ignore that. So we have Phyllis, who is a very important secondary character, who's the only Black woman member of Jane. And indeed, there was only one Black woman member of Jane, in the sort of inner circle. Um, so that was something that I did choose to explore. And it was really interesting to do that. It was tough, but really rewarding.
I think that is brilliant because when I was reading the book and when Phyllis' character comes into the picture and she mentioned this as well, that there are very few Black women who are involved with the procedure, and I would like to be one of them. So this opens the reader's mind into a whole different perspective that we today, at this point in time, we don't think about that. We don't even look at it like that, Black versus white, or there might not be that many Black women that who would be in the inner circle of the Jane Collective. But when you read it, you're like, oh, yes, that would have been something that was happening also. And which is why all the judgment was coming, when these women were
Yes.
actually going to actual doctors. Because, and Veronica mentions this, I think, in the very beginning, that the doctors who these women were going to initially, previously, the very judgmental. They used to lecture them and they used to talk about all of the things that they should be doing instead of coming here and going for an abortion procedure, which is alarming and also an eye opener at the same time, I think.
Yes. Yes. Um, you know, and to go back to like hope, there are so many more conversations now about racial and so other kinds of socioeconomic and all kinds of disparities in healthcare, right? Um, that were not being talked about like until pretty recently. But now we're talking about them really directly, and there's research money going towards studying them and trying to figure out how to bridge the gap and all of those things. We
Right.
got a long way
Which
to go.
sorry?
We got a long way to go, but the
Yeah,
first step is recognizing it and saying we have to fix it. So that's where
absolutely.
we
I
are.
mean, absolutely. I recently read a law, or not exactly a law, a kind of a suggestion or an amendment that's going around that there'll only be two genders that will be recognized in the US going forward, something like that. Which brings me to the next question, that we have gender fluidity and talks around that happening all over the world at this point in time. How do you think this affects the conversations and discussions that we have around abortions? And what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I am not an expert on all of these issues, so I really want to like say that from the start. I think when we talk about reproductive health care, we are talking about reproductive justice and healthcare justice. And those words are on purpose much more all encompassing. So, like, abortion is a hot button topic, but it is only one, uh, you know, in the larger conversation about reproductive justice, because reproductive justice is also about maternal mortality, which breaks down 100% along racial lines, right? It's also about the history of forced sterilization in this country, and you know and the effects that that has had on certain communities and the way that they think about doctors and healthcare. And so it's become a much more complicated, big subject appropriately. And I think that's all I can really say about it. I think I'm glad that it is so much more inclusive, this conversation. Um, sometimes we see people within the movements, fighting about various things, but there do seem to be enough, at least from where I'm sitting, there seem to be enough activists and, doctors and all the people, lawmakers looking at it with a nice big lens.
Yeah.
um, so that hopefully, if the Equal Rights Amendment finally passes, it will include all of this that we're talking about, because it isn't just about women anymore, right? It's about non-binary and trans and all of the non-cis male, people.
Right.
So
Of course, definitely. The best part, I think, at this point in time is that we're at least talking about it. We're all aware. There's a lot more awareness than there was about a decade back or so, and we've started talking about it. We are having discussions. We're having open discourses on something that is essential to survive at this point in time, on identities, on gender discrimination, and all of that. And I think this is how it begins, and this is the first step probably for a big change that needs to come.
yes,
And we still have a long way to go, but we're at least starting to
yeah,
recognize a lot of things. We're starting to recognize people. We're starting to recognize that there are a lot more identities, and we cannot stay restricted in a small box.
exactly. Agreed, 100%.
I think one major question that I had from you as well was about the political change that has recently happened in the US. And how do you think that's going to impact abortions now? In 2022, we still had Biden, but now we have Trump. What do you think are the implications going to be like, and where are we headed?
Well, I mean, it's not great, right? um, I don't have a crystal ball. Um, I said earlier in the interview that I think, I truly think that, Project 2025 like made it pretty clear that they want to erode, these rights for everybody, not just leave it up to the states. Um, I think that states, my my very strong impression is that states like Massachusetts, like California, will fight tooth and nail to keep some of these rights safe in some parts of the country. Um, I, that's all I'll say about it. That's I wish I knew. We're the time we are in is very uncertain and very precarious, and so. But I will say this: abortion rights are popular. The majority of Americans believe in abortion rights, and
Mhm.
Republicans and conservatives want to stay in power. So it is not actually in their interest to completely
Right.
take
Yeah.
away. So
I
I'm
think
hoping,
sometimes
so let me just finish this one thought. I'm hoping that the irony here will be that their desire to stay in power will preserve certain rights, but I don't know. That's just a hope. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think that's very true. I was just agreeing with you that this probably happens a lot of the time that people say a lot of things in their manifesto when they are, when the elections are going on, but sometimes those things do not turn into a reality, and that is all we can hope for at this point in time because we don't
Correct.
really know what's going to happen.
No, we don't. We don't.
Coming back to all you have to do is call. I think we had like a very lovely discussion, Gary. It was
Yes, yes.
really amazing talking to you about this. But and I'm really cognizant of the time that I think we are over time. But Before I let you go, I would love to get some book recommendations from you on women. And what would you like to recommend me, your audience? What should they read this Women's Day?
Okay, so I always have to open up my Libro FM audiobook app um, in order to adequately answer this question. Um, uh, so a few of my favorites recently have been The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I'm sorry, it's I haven't read that one yet. It's her Circe book that I've read that is absolutely terrific. So it's a retelling of the Circe story from Greek myths. Absolutely fantastic. Um, All Fours by Miranda July. Has that made a splash over in India yet?
Yes, yes, I have a copy of the book. I have a copy of the book, but I haven't read it yet.
It is excellent. It is edgy. I'm not
I
gonna
am going
lie.
to read. I'm
It
going
is
to read. I have it
absolutely edgy.
somewhere here. Yes, I have it. I have this copy.
There it is. There it is. Beautiful. Yes. It's absolutely an edgy book, but I highly recommend it. It's a great one for Women's History Day. Um, let's see. If you like lighter fare, um, a charming um, sort of cozy mystery that I read once that stars some really terrific female leads is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. Have you had that over there? It's a
No,
terrific,
I
it's
don't have the book.
lovely.
It did launch in India though. I have seen it in the bookstores, but I haven't read it yet.
Okay, and my final one is Matrix by Lauren Groff, which is about a medieval nun in England, uh, who she's from a French family. She's from a wealthy French family, who falls out of favor, and she gets sent to run this falling down convent in like England, which is like to France in the Middle Ages, England was like the end of the earth, right? Like, so, but she turns this place around and she becomes one of the most powerful women in 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 her generation. It's absolutely terrific. I highly recommend that too. So those are three really, a few really different kinds of books, but all starring really fantastic, strong women who will inspire people, I think, in different kinds of ways.
I'm going to read them. I'm definitely going to pick them up, and I'm sure our audience will too, because very interesting descriptions. I actually bought this book because I really like the blurb, but now that you have talked about all fours, I think I'm gonna pick it up very, very, very soon.
It moved up in your to be read list.
Absolutely, it did. It's gonna be my next read now.
Let me know what you think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kerri,
Thank
and
you.
thank you so much for everything, for the conversation, for writing all you have to do is call, and for talking to me. I had a lovely time discussing the book with you and so many other topics related to the book, the Chain Collective, political atmosphere, and everything. I'm sure this conversation is going to compel people to pick up. All you have to do is call. If they haven't read it yet, please, people in India, I really, really request all of you guys to go pick this book up. It's going to open your minds, it's going to open your eyes, and it's going to do a lot more than, any other book can. And yeah, thank you so much, fellow readers, for tuning into this conversation. I hope you had a lovely time listening to us, listening to Kerri talk about her book. And yeah, I really hope to see you guys again in the next episode. Till then, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram. I'll also add Kerri's Insta handle in the description below so you guys can follow her, stay updated with what she's writing, what she's working on next. And I'll see you in the next episode. Till then, happy reading. Bye bye.
Happy reading.